All right, good afternoon. My name is John Drake, and I am the Vice President of Transportation, Infrastructure, and Supply Chain for the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. And I'm really excited to be sitting down with this panel today to discuss readiness strategies that improve supply chain resilience. And the panel today brings together key players from all sectors that have that goal in mind. Look, the challenges that our world has faced in recent years now illustrate the increased importance of supply chain coordination across the private and public sectors. The public is seeing the importance of this firsthand as throughout the COVID-19 pandemic, when we saw shortages of many goods, including medical supplies, food, and even toilet paper. Natural disasters are also looming, such as wildfires, flooding, and severe drought that are posing increasing challenges. And these weather patterns aren't going away anytime soon. Russia's invasion of Ukraine isn't only jeopardizing the lives of Ukraine citizens, but the war is also on track to cause a surge in severe malnutrition and even starvation in parts of the world. Today, now more than ever, all eyes are looking to how our supply chains will remain resilient in the face of these growing challenges. Through today's discussion, our hope is to leave you with a greater understanding of how the public and private sectors can cohesively work together in order to further pursue supply chain efficiency. It is my honor to introduce today's panelists. Thank you, each and every one of you, for taking time out of your busy schedules to be here today. Our first panelist is Jerry O'Dwyer. Jerry is a principal at Deloitte's Supply Chain and Manufacturing Operations practice, where he currently leads their supply chain mergers and acquisitions offering. In addition, he's a global strategy and operations leader and a member of the Global Consulting Executive Committee. In these roles, he is responsible for defining Deloitte's global consulting strategy and operations practice and charting a path to global market leadership. Within the supply chain, Jerry's focus has been on sourcing and procurement, and over the last several years, Jerry has advised a number of Fortune 500 companies as they transform their procurement capabilities globally. In addition to his supply chain focus, Jerry also helps lead Deloitte's strategic cost transformation practice and is very active in growing this multidisciplinary offering. Our second panelist is Brett Mcmillan, who is the Global Director of Strategic Partners for Amazon Supply Chain at Amazon. His team provides integrated, end-to-end supply chain solutions across warehousing, logistics, and technology to empower the public sector and highly regulated industry organizations to better serve citizens and improve mission effectiveness. Brett joined Amazon in May 2011 as a general manager of the Amazon Web Services Worldwide Public Sector team. He oversaw customer relationships with U.S. federal civilian agencies and the Defense Health Agency. He also led AWS Ground Station, a fully managed service that enables customers to easily command, control, and downlink data from satellites. Our third panelist is Kathy Fulton, who is the Executive Director for the American Logistics Aid Network. ALLN is an industry-wide organization that exists to provide supply chain assistance to disaster relief organizations and other nonprofits. She leads the organization in delivering logistics information, services, and equipment to support disaster response and recovery efforts, including leveraging the skills of supply chain professionals to help provide disaster relief and build cross-sector collaborative relationships that support community resilience. Kathy serves as a member of the National Academy of Sciences Consensus Committee on building adaptable and resilient supply chains following Hurricanes Harvey, Irma, and Maria, and is a member of FEMA's Supply Chain Analysis Network. Preceding her work with ALLN, Kathy was a senior manager of information technology services at Saddle Creek Logistics Services, where she led IT infrastructure implementation and support, corporate systems, and business continuity planning. Our final panelist is Jeff Dorko, who is FEMA's Assistant Administrator for Logistics within the Office of Response and Recovery. From early 2020 through the end of 2021, he served as Acting Deputy Associate Administrator for Response Recovery before returning to logistics. His initial assignment at FEMA was as Director of the Office of Federal Disaster Coordination, where he worked with the agency's field leaders, including the Federal Coordinating Officers and Federal Disaster Recovery Coordinators. Mr. Dorko's public service career spans more than 40 years, including with the United States Army, serving in key leadership positions before completing his military service as the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers Deputy Commander for Military and International Operations. So, a very distinguished panel. Thank you again for being here today. And Jeff, I'd like to start with you.
Sure.
From your perspective, how is the COVID pandemic continuing to impact supply chain efficiency? And what do you see as the long-term challenges going forward?
Yeah, so where we are now, so what's going to happen next? I think more of the unpredictable same. So, the disease has morphed over time. Our response to the disease has morphed over time. Just look at, supply has shrunk. Supply has consolidated in some cases. Demand has changed. Demand has been destroyed, I think, in some cases. And against that backdrop, we as a nation have tried to react. Onshore, nearshore things. In the meantime, at a very practical level, you're trying to figure out how all these reverberations that have gone through supply chains, has very, very day-to-day meaning for us. Where are the containers and where are the chassis? Where is the capacity and what is the new and true nature of the demand right now? And so there's probably a question coming later on. What about after, COVID? I don't know what after means. Because the disease has changed right now. I think it is going to be with us. I think other things like it might be with us. And so, the flexibility and our ability to adapt and change, to understand the nature of the threat, and then how we're going to have to adapt to that threat. I'm a really practical guy. I'm just an old combat engineer. And, from a practical perspective at FEMA, we take care of people before, during, and after disasters. And the heart of that is during the disaster and in the immediate aftermath, in the first hours or days or weeks or so of response, where life-saving and life-sustaining issues are at hand. That's where we need to be able to respond and fill the gaps, the needs, and those gaps are needs that are left open by whatever, a supply chain shortfall, a business shortfall, something that government had provided before, and to fill those gaps. And then we look in increasingly concentric circles out into the supply chain, further upstream, further downstream, as to where things are coming. And it's against that dynamic that we have tried to adjust. You mentioned, against that backdrop, we have been very much a hurricane-centric organization, I think, in FEMA for a number of years, but we're expanding our view of the world and understanding that response to disaster, it's all about logistics, and the logistics part of all this is all about supply chain and getting business back to business. With certain principles behind all that. We as the federal government, first, do no harm. We take the Hippocratic oath early on, and how I look at us against the backdrop of this evolving disease and its evolving impacts on supply chain and the evolving response to that. We need to, first of all, you all out there are the pros from Dover. I live my life through movies. The pros from Dover, the original MASH movie, right? Who do this. You did it up until the event. You are going to do it starting the moment after the event. And that little kind of ditch that's created, the downturn, the idea is what do we need to do to compress that and to lessen the impact? And how do we do that by staying out of your way? How do we remove barriers to business getting back to business and supply chains being restored, however that might happen? And then we realize there's probably still a role for us. There's going to be some unmet needs, some capacity that needs to go in there that is aligned with what you, the private sector, are doing, aligned, synchronized, and integrated with what we're going to need to do. That is all that we're doing right now. It's all that we're going to be doing tomorrow, and I think those principles will apply on into the future. But we are increasingly trying to understand supply chain and be able to work with our partners better so we deliver that need that a disaster survivor has at that critical moment when they just had their worst day, and however we get that to them. And 99% of the time, it comes from you. And we need to figure out how we make that happen and remove barriers for that. You mentioned in Kathy's bio, you always come to one of these events with a prop, right? The National Academy of Sciences. And so what's been fundamental for me, I've learned a lot from Kathy and a whole bunch of other folks in this room, Jared Gensel, if he's out there, and Persia's out there. I've learned from a lot of folks. But after the 2017 hurricane season, we commissioned a study to look at supply chains, strengthening post-hurricane supply chain resilience. And if you look around, you can probably find a committee member who was part of all that. And I would commend this to everybody because I think it lays out a framework of what I described. And maybe we're not quite there yet, but we will get there. And we will get away from this mindset of what we in FEMA do to replace, capacity as opposed to restoring capacity. And then the relationships, the information exchange, the training and the building of the ties between public and private sector so we can bring what we need to disasters. All that was a long, you asked what time it was, I talked about how to build a watch. So, back to your question, so how do you see the supply chain business playing out? I see it as being dynamic. As this has evolved just over the last couple of years, things start to come back. Things start to move. Shanghai gets locked down again. You look at where, again, containers and chassis are located around the world, where you look at L.A. Long Beach, lots of boats, not so lots of boats. Ships that are now having to transit the Panama Canal and come in from the East Coast because it's easier, faster, cheaper than going into the West Coast. I think that dynamic continues. And our ability to sense that, understand it, anticipate the next move to the degree we can, and you can't always do that, is going to be the key to success. Thank you.
Thank you. And Jerry, if I may just turn over to you, from the private sector side, when you're advising your clients, what's been your perspective from that side of the equation?
So, great question. I've seen a wholesale shift in the thinking. So I've been in this industry 28 years, and up until 2.5 years ago, it was all cost efficiency, lean out the inventory, lean out the system, lean out the supply chain, extend supply chains, because there was predictability to it. Now, I think there's tacit recognition that there's unpredictability, and so there's a thinking now, and I think building on the comments from earlier, my clients are thinking now, how do they how do they put buffers into the system to absorb shocks? As opposed to always trying to lean out your inventories. They now know they need redundancy, not only in inventory, they need redundancy in source of supply, they need redundancy in manufacturing capability and capacity, they need assurance of supply. So there's been a complete rethinking, and there's, you mentioned nearshoring, there's been a move to nearshore capacity, and I see where I used to just solely work for heads of supply chain, COOs, I'm now getting invited into board meetings to talk about supply chain risk and resiliency, and what should the board be thinking about, and how do they plan for it, and what investments do they need to make. So it's been an exciting time, but the profit equation or the mathematical equation that businesses now need to think through is different, because there now needs to be extra capacity in every node, in every facet of the supply chain.
Yeah, my understanding is through this current quarter of reporting season, that nearshoring and reshoring have been like the number one and number two terms that have been discussed during a lot of these earnings calls. So it's certainly
it's not easy. So everyone's fighting now for capacity or searching for capacity. So and during the pandemic, companies took manufacturing lines down because they had less, and now they're realizing they can make more money with less capacity. So there's very much a trade-off. Everyone's doing the same math. I'm sorry, Kathy.
No, I was just going to say, you're talking about redundancy, but we also have to, we can't nearshore or reshore everything and then concentrate our risk again. Jeff talked about, concentration of risk. He mentioned that just briefly. And, we have to be super careful that we are not just switching the problem from, one of distance to one of, some other type of risk.
good. Well, Brett, let me put you on the spot, if I may. With these present and future stressors that are in mind, as well as everything else we haven't talked about, but it's kind of floating out there, what are you recommending that companies and Amazon needs to do to prepare their resources to combat these concerns within, Amazon's supply chain?
Yeah, so when you start looking at supply chains and how you've set up your supply chain, one of the things that is most important is it's not a final destination that you've solidified your supply chain. Instead, what you need to be doing is putting innovation and agility into your supply chain, because we had COVID, we learned a lot for COVID. We don't know what the next supply chain challenge is going to be. Now, I work for Amazon, and luckily we had that in our DNA of constant innovation, constant agility. If you go to one of our fulfillment centers that was 5 years old, it looks completely different than what we're doing today. So we're constantly innovating. When COVID happened, a lot of people stopped going to the store and they started ordering online. we had to build out. We had a long history of doing that type of a change. We have cyclical natures. A lot of people buy during the period we call peak period between Thanksgiving and Christmas. We also have Prime Day. We were able to, because we had that history of agility, we were able to, in 2 years, add more capacity to our network than we had done in the previous 20 years. And so you have to be thinking in those terms. And not every organization has the capacity to do that. Not every organization can have as many people as Amazon has innovating, creating that agility in things. And so the group that I'm at Amazon Supply Chain is taking all of those capabilities and they're making them available to the public sector as well as enterprises. And so now folks, rather than investing in all that, can actually utilize either their own warehouses or a combination of their warehouses with us and take advantage of that constant agility and innovation that we're bringing to the market.
What have been some of the challenges in kind of putting those best practices forward and helping these?
Yeah. So you asked the question about COVID. We learned so much during COVID. We learned how to work remotely. We learned how to get along with our families. Everything happened during COVID. But I want to highlight there were some amazing things that happened with public-private partnerships, and I think we need to look at that and do that moving forward. And in the supply chain area, one of the areas that we were involved with is when COVID hit, one of the things we needed to do was test. And how do you get test kits in people's hands? And so more than 20 states worked with us on how you deliver that. We have a service we call multi-channel fulfillment where it's essentially prime delivery. And I believe the state of Colorado was the first one that did that. And so what they did was they ordered directly from the manufacturer, sent it to one of our fulfillment centers that was able to handle tens of millions of COVID test kits. And then through our Amazon Web Services, we helped them build a citizen portal where they'd say, send me a test kit quickly. And we utilized our network. It was the Prime Delivery Network that got it to them in 1 or 2 days. And like I said, multiple states did that. We did that in the state of Washington, and the governor actually said in all his years of public service, that was the most successful public-private partnership that he's ever experienced. So I think moving forward from COVID, when you're talking about supply chain or technology in general, we need to leverage these public-private partnerships even more.
Yeah, I recall during a period of time where I'm really trying to block out, when the kids were at home, and but just, even FEMA, right? I mean, your role really transformed during that time, just in terms of the information that you're pushing out to the public. I think a lot of other federal agencies as well, in terms of just helping to bring supplies in as they needed, helping keep awareness of supplies that were coming into the ports, and just a huge transformation, I think, in what you all were doing. So I don't know if you respond to that or...
No. Yeah. I'll accept the comment. Yeah, I think we did.
Kathy, if I may. So look, we're right now, peak of summer, right? We're seeing daily reminders of drought in the West, right? Forest fires, climate change and the effects of climate change seems to be daily front page news, right? Help me understand what this is doing for the conversations around the urgency around resiliency discussions. Look, a few years ago, we would never see the frequency and seriousness of these events like they have been stacking up. It seems like, we're going to just barely get through the forest fire season, and we're going to have your favorite time of the year, the hurricane season, right? And so it just doesn't seem like there's an end to any of this. Sorry, bad joke there. So what steps should companies be taking about when they try to stay more present in this conversation around the numerous disasters that we're seeing throughout the globe? Kathy?
Yeah, you talk about staying present in the conversation, and I think that really is about getting back to fundamentals, relationships, curiosity, right? So when I talk about curiosity, I'm actually referring to the National Academy's report, not to beat a dead horse here, but the National Academy's report, recommendation 2, talks about having a systems understanding, an understanding of how, the environment, not weather environment, but what's happening. And understanding your place in that ecosystem, I think, is really important. How are you as an organization contributing to climate change? But how are you also mitigating? What steps are you taking to mitigate the impacts? As our organization has actually just in the past couple of years taken a shift in how we support some of our nonprofit partners with their humanitarian moves. If they have needs that, supplies that need to be moved into a disaster area, we're really looking hard at, are those supplies readily available in that area rather than moving them 1,000 miles, right? We don't want to help contribute to climate change with greenhouse gases or whatever by moving supplies that are already there long distances. And oh, by the way, we're also helping to support the local economy and local businesses when you do that. So I think it's all, it all fits together. So, there's really a lot going on around the climate change conversation. It's hard to keep tabs on everything that's going on. I'm not a climate scientist. Don't even play one on TV. But I think that just like I said, the relationships, knowing who you can call, who's the experts, and the curiosity around what's my impact? And Brett's going to jump in.
Yeah, sorry. I liked what you said, that in order to combat climate change, we're going to have everyone involved. It's not just a government problem. It's not just an individual problem. It's everyone involved. I'm very proud to be working for a company that has taken a leadership position in that. We were one of the co-founders of the Climate Pledge, which is a group of companies that have pledged that by 2040 we will be carbon neutral, zero carbon emissions, and we're well on the way to doing that. We've put in an order for 100,000 electric vans that will be delivering things. So you can see these really cool Rivian vans going through your neighborhood. We're investing heavily in both a solar panel as well as wind panel. In fact, we're one of the largest investors in that in the world. But even that's not enough. I mean, we need more research into that. So we've put up $2 billion for carbon research. And that's just what we're doing. And I think that every company, every organization needs to step up to the plate here for climate change.
Jerry, how are you advising your clients in this challenge?
So our clients are now, obviously thinking more and more about the climate sustainability, but something Kathy said earlier around curiosity. I think that really struck a chord with me. It's not just about climate; it's about knowing your supply base really well. So typically, your top 1, 2, 3 tiers of your supply chain. But then, I use an example of a medical device manufacturer that their whole production line got stopped because a 5th tier supplier, who's the only source supply for an adhesive that goes into a pacemaker, went out of business. And I think the curiosity comment leads to something we talked about earlier this morning about readiness. Readiness starts now. So I think the government and private sector does a pretty good job about responding and then working through the recovery. But it's the readiness piece and it's the collaboration across different sectors, NGOs, government, and private sector. So my clients now, I'm telling them, think through what are the risks you don't know? How well do you know your supply chain, your supply base? How many tiers do you have visibility into that supply chain? What level of modeling are you doing around various scenarios that could impact your supply chain? In some cases, it's going to be weather dependent, it's going to be an infrastructure event, or it could be, frankly, a supply-based event. I have a client that has a capability, because we helped them stand it up. It's called an Assurance of Supply Center. We have every one of their top 200 vendors, suppliers, mapped. We have real-time feeds into the facilities. Unexpectedly, one of the plants, the supplier's plants blew up. We were able to redirect manufacturing orders and get production going within 22 minutes to another vendor. Again, they invested in the readiness. That takes money, that takes capital, and I think, comment about, you said about what Amazon's doing. You're so fortunate. You also have, not only do you have the culture and the DNA, you also have the capital. So our clients, some of my clients are just in more mature industries are, always straddling that line about what can I afford to do? What can I afford to invest? So.
To the point of the systems understanding and the readiness thing, how do you do that? We have to do this to make sure we stay out of the way and we do things correctly, or as correctly as can be done. I think we do. I mean, we're all here together, so we do that. During a disaster, during a response, the National Business Emergency Operations Center is up, and you all are out there, and we're dialoguing. And during the disaster, we have the supply chain analysis network that we bring in to go look at certain problem sets that we give them. But I think beforehand, I mean, readiness starts well in advance of the first sighting of a storm or the first feeling of the shake from a seismic event. I think we can do much better in terms of integrating the private sector into our planning so that we understand how to do this better, how to stay out of the way. I think we are starting to do that. I mean, lesson to me was we continue to redo our plans for Wasatch, the seismic event, the Salt Lake City area. It's really interesting. Salt Lake City looks a lot like Puerto Rico. We learned a lot of hard lessons in Puerto Rico. 3 million people in an isolated area, albeit you're not surrounded by water. And I think we took a step in integrating supply chain integration, business resilience into that. And I think that takes us a long way to being much better. It was just at a rehearsal of concept drill for the Cascadia seismic event, and it was very government focused. And that was good because there's a government side of the systems that are there. I think we have that down really well, but I don't think we've necessarily, now it's time to integrate the private sector, integrate business and supply chains and all that, so we have a holistic look at what is broken and what is that we're attempting to restore.
But I would submit that the government should not always get out of the way. The government has a great convening power.
Yep.
And if you think about different sectors that are critical to our national security, our safety, and lives and livelihoods, perhaps, and I think that the current administration is doing this across semiconductors, precious metals, and other things, really convening a discussion around what should the national strategy be with supply chain in those sectors. So that's a wonderful role for government to play.
And convening in terms of exercises too. I mean, that's the other half of planning. I think exercises reveal a lot, develop relationships, bring folks together.
Yeah, I was just going to add on to that, which it flows right into what Jerry said about, government needs to bring private sector into their planning, but private sector also needs to bring government into their planning, and not just from a, hey, what can we sell to you, government, but also what are the information components that government is especially well prepared to provide. What are the resources that government has? Business, I mean, we can't, yes, we do most everything on our own, but in a disaster situation, in a catastrophic situation, which is, where I spend more of my time worrying about, in a catastrophic situation, it's going to take all of us, right? And so we can't just write our plans exclusive of any other sector.
And it's kind of, I mean, this is an opportunity, but it's a challenge at the same time too, right? Because you have, on the one hand, there's opportunities for better understanding, better kind of building and resilience, but on the other side, there's other parts, of the government that's taking a hard look at supply chains and supply chain resilience and expecting more, right? In terms of ethical sourcing and the like. And so it's a difficult proposition for a lot of companies who don't have necessarily the resources of like an Amazon or a larger corporation like that.
But they do have access to their local, mayor, right? They do have access to government at the level of government where they need to interact. And I think we, as private sector, need to do more enabling of those relationships at the right level of connectivity. And not just say NBOC is the solution, because it's a great solution, but it doesn't work for everybody.
Yeah, I was going to say, when you start thinking about doing resiliency of supply chains, two of the things that you really should be focusing on is visibility. Can you see what's in your supply chain? Can you see what's deep into your supply chain? But also diversity of your supply chain. All too often we have a great supplier and it's working well, and something behind them fails, and now you have to go set up something else. And those are two areas that we've spent a lot of time focusing on and providing that as solutions to our customers. So many of you know, buying from the consumer website on Amazon. Well, we also have an Amazon Business, which is an enterprise website where enterprises, governments are doing it today, corporations are doing it today. And what that gives you is the ability to get to millions of third-party sellers. And it gives you visibility on what they have in inventory. Because in order to set up supply chains with multiple different suppliers, it's expensive.
Yeah.
You got to do different contracts, you've got to do this and everything else. We're actually doing that as a natural part of our business. And so we're providing that to our customers, and it makes it really easy to just set up a single account with Amazon and then get access to that. And the other cool thing about those millions of third-party sellers, we call them fulfillment by Amazon, is a majority of them are small businesses. And so a majority of everything that Amazon ships is from a small business. And so we're growing the small businesses out there. And then from the visibility thing, you not only can track it when it's coming to you, as most people understand from Prime, but with Amazon Business, it gives you a lot of visibility on what's happening behind the scenes as far as these organizations having those products and getting them available. So if you are able to do it yourself, fantastic. If you're able to set up multiple contracts and do all that. But if not, there's options out there so that you can do that, you can get that as a service.
So I think what you're implying there, I mean, part of it is just sort of the business transactions, right, and having access to those vendors and to those sellers. But the other part is trust, right? Who can you trust when you're out there? And that's what you're saying that you're helping provide for one of your customers. So that's especially becoming much more important in this, in this space as well. Brett, let me ask you, how do we take advantage of the technology that makes our industries more resilient without becoming too dependent upon their usefulness?
Yeah, so...
Small question.
Yeah, and it goes back to what I was just saying. When you look at some of the challenges that are happening out there, technology can solve that. It wasn't too long ago that it would have been really hard to set up an environment in which where you could work with one organization and would have access to many different organizations. So from the supply chain sourcing point of view, technology is solving that problem by giving you that visibility. I spent the first 10 years of my career at Amazon over at Amazon Web Services, and we did a lot to help people with doing analytics and predicting analysis and things like that on their supply chains. And that's another area where you can understand what the trends are going to be. We do that internally. That's why we can handle these peaks during the peak buying season or Amazon Prime. And so we're able to help folks with that side of it also.
I don't think you're going to get away from technology. I mean,
Say that again, sorry.
I don't think you're going to get we will rely on technology. We will be dependent. It's just the pace and the speed of decision making, the complexity of the choices you have to think through, you have to rely on it.
But we can't be victims of our own efficiencies, right? I mean, so yes, we have to rely on technology, but we also need to understand how are we going to operate if there's an EMP? How are we going to operate whenever, what do we do when all of the communications lines are down and we still have to feed people, right? And so and that's when it starts to come down to relationships, and it starts to come down to having exercise together and having prepared together. So, I'm not a Luddite by any means. I spent the first part of my career in IT, but I also am very concerned, about the risk that, we have put a lot of effort into technology to make ourselves more efficient, and that efficiency has also yielded fragility.
Kathy, do you think that there are more than just, that's a pretty extreme event, right, that you're talking about? Like, are there...
Cyber attack.
Yeah.
Colonial Pipeline, the Director Easterly mentioned it earlier, affected states, far away, right? And that wasn't even so much the technological failure as it was a failure of understanding the system and residents misunderstanding. I live in Florida. We don't get our fuel from most of the fuel from the Colonial Pipeline. My fuel comes in via boat to Port of Tampa and then, gets on a truck and comes to me in Central Florida. But we had a run on gas because we don't understand the system, right? And could there have been messaging around that? So, but just other technological, I think was your question.
From your perspective, I think the awareness is there, right? But do you think enough is being done to prepare for those contingencies?
I don't think in general we prepare enough for catastrophic events in any way, shape, or form.
Jeff, what do you think?
Less than I turned early on, Craig Fugate was the FEMA administrator at the time. He says his greatest fear was that we will prepare for that which we know we can do. And we would not be ready for the catastrophic. Cyber, Colonial Pipeline is a classic example. Yeah, in some ways, we are not too far removed with some of our systems from where we were a lot more rudimentary in what we had to do. So, how do you operate with a pencil and a phone in being able to make things happen? And I think that's absolutely critical. And we talk a lot about supply. The other half of this is demand, and not that you can manage demand or you can manage human nature. But I think that the whole idea of messaging, things get cattywampus where you have supply and demand, and the two don't equal each other, and so there is a demand side to this that being able to quickly gain and maintain an awareness of what's going on, to decide, the whole OODA loop thing, and when you decide to be able to message and manage, the decisions that you made, I think are absolutely critical, and not a lot of that requires sophisticated systems. It requires maybe some fairly sophisticated decision making, but messaging is really, really key after that.
Yeah, when you start talking about preparing for some sort of catastrophic event or the next pandemic, I've never found that it's good to try to predict everything that could be coming at you. But instead, if you start building in agility and innovation in a constant motion, and then ask yourself, can I pivot? Can I pivot my supply chain quickly? And if you can do those things, then you can be better prepared for just about anything that's coming.
I'm a big fan of improv comedy. I have a daughter who's a comedian, and I think that a lot of us could learn lots of lessons from, just those principles. Always say yes, and make your partner look good.
Let's see. So, so kind of following on that, what are the opportunities you see for developing a better shared understanding of supply chain flows in advance of a crisis? What are some of the tools you think that are out there? I think, Jeff, you said it needs to be sophisticated decision making, not necessarily sophisticated tools. But Jerry, maybe turning over to you, how do you see this playing out?
I'm going to build off something Kathy said, which is, again, goes back to curiosity. We need to be asking the question, what if this happens? What are we prepared for? A series of events, and some of these we've never experienced before. And every one of my clients, they're overworked. They have so much on their agenda. This is not a fun thing for them to do.
Right.
But I think the point of continuing to ask the question, and I think you have it inherent in Amazon, is like, what else? What more can we be doing? How do we solve what we don't even see coming around the corner? I will put a plug in. I see some clients taking some of their young, high-performing talent and running them through supply chain now, simply because they get a great exposure to how the business runs, and then they put them back into the business. So, not directly on point to your question, but the intellectual curiosity, always asking the question, but then also have some of your best talent run through supply chain and get some exposure there, because it's going to be invaluable when all of us are retired.
If you have to be a problem solver in supply chain, and my friend Mary Long at University of Tennessee is a big advocate of this. Supply chain is where it's at. You have to be a problem solver. If you can solve problems in logistics and supply chain, you can solve problems in any business circumstance.
It's the new $1 million job.
It is.
I think we got time for one more question. So let's just kind of following up on that, or continuing that dialogue there. what are some recommendations out there to encourage partnerships within the private sector to just kind of keep these innovations going and continuing to kind of think about these sorts of these challenges in real time and be, I think, as your daughter is, able to just sort of adjust in the moment. Jerry, why don't we start with you? And don't go with curiosity. You got to give me one.
No, again, it's been said before. I think communication, having those relationships, and establishing those conversations, even when there's a period of non-crisis, non-disruption, knowing who to call, having discussions on topics that everyone is kind of wrestling with, that don't raise an antitrust, issue, but you can talk about topics openly and say yes. If you get invited to a conference like this, attend. You're going to meet more people. You're going to understand the issues that are being discussed, and you're going to be better coming back to your own company or the organization you work for. So it's kind of glib, but I mean, it's not that hard.
So we've talked about a broad range of things on here, and a lot of organizations are doing supply chain, but that's not what they really are set up to do. They're set up to do something else, and supply chain is something that is just critical for them to delivering on their mission, but that's not what they're really set up to do. And so I think it's important for organizations to kind of listen to this discussion we're having and ask themselves, do they really want to invest in this? Or do they want to partner with organizations that are really good at doing this? And the answer is probably a combination there. But if you are an organization that absolutely needs supply chain, which just about anybody is, and you don't have the ability to do this type of resiliency that we're talking about, I think it's critical that you reach out to companies like yours, companies like ours, other companies that are experts in this, so that you can add that to your competency. When I was over at AWS, we used to say in the IT world, we helped remove undifferentiated heavy lifting. I think that's kind of what we're doing here on the supply chain side also.
I'll be very brief because I know we're out of time. Relationships matter. Yeah. It's the most important thing.
Jeff, last word.
Besides relationships is convene. You get relationships because you get together. There are also, the federal government has the ability to convene. CISA has convening authorities. Academic institutions can convene. Other organizations can. I just think every opportunity we have to get together, if it's around an exercise, whatever it's around, anytime we get two or more of us together, a lot of goodness comes out of that. The whole ends up being much, much greater than the sum of the parts that come to the table.
Well, Jeff, Kathy, Brett, and Jerry, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate the conversation. I think we're at the end here, and thank you all.